The shutdown is exposing deep divisions over U.S. domestic priorities, and the consequences could extend well beyond American borders. At the heart of the impasse, Democrats are pushing to extend federal health subsidies to keep millions insured, while Republicans say no negotiations will take place until the government reopens. The standoff is testing confidence in Washington's ability to govern, with global markets watching closely. We begin with this report.
Democrats are holding out for now, saying that unless their calls for the renewal of subsidies for health care plans are agreed to, Americans are going to be paying a whole lot more for their insurance next year.
If Congress doesn't act by October 31st, millions of Americans will see higher premiums when open enrollment begins November 1st. The decisions made or not in the next 10 days will determine whether working families can afford their health care next year. And Americans are desperately looking to Republicans, the party in the majority, to do something about it.
Republicans, however, are not budging. House Speaker Mike Johnson says the Democrats are to blame for the shutdown.
Well, it's already been, as we noted yesterday, the longest full government shutdown in history. October 22nd marks another landmark. This is now the second longest government shutdown of any kind ever in the history of our country, and it's just shameful. Democrats keep making history, but they're doing it for all the wrong reasons.
Meanwhile, more and more federal workers are facing furloughs or even firings as cuts to the federal workforce kick in. Democrats, with an eye on the latest opinion polls, think most Americans will blame President Trump and his fellow Republicans.
Republicans control the White House, the Senate, and the House. They control the agenda. They control the responsibility for what is happening.
For many exhausted Americans, however, they just want their government to start functioning again. Diane Hodges, CGTN, Washington.
And to discuss this and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from New York, Kaivan Shroff is the senior advisor at the Institute for Education. From Maryland, Joseph Williams is a former senior editor at U.S. News and World Report. Out of Los Angeles, William Lee is the chief economist at the Milken Institute, and here in the studio, Brandon Brice is a conservative columnist and secretary of the Delaware Republican Party. We will be discussing the deadlock that we have in D.C. A big issue here is health. Brandon, what's going on?
You know, Diego, no one benefits when there's a shutdown. You and I both know people who are out of work, who are trying to buy food. And here's the catch. The government may shut down, but Comcast cable and your bills, they keep going. And so this is hurting Americans. And I would say, you know, even though this is clearly the Democrats who are playing games with the American people's lives, the person who's going to get blamed, it's typically, when you look at shutdowns, it's who's in power who gets the blame. We looked at the bills that the Democrats tried to pass. Many of them are not even supporting Americans. They're supporting undocumented people, and yet they're saying that the Republicans are holding it up. Diego, this is impacting the country. No one wins.
I want to go to Kaivan. Kaivan, the deadlock is around health benefits, right? Why can't Democrats and Republicans achieve some kind of understanding about these benefits?
Well, I think part of it is Republicans don't even seem to be willing to meet and negotiate some of these issues. Donald Trump, at the last minute before this shutdown, went back and forth. Was he going to meet Schumer's and Jeffries? Was he not going to? Then he did meet them. He spent a total of 1 hour trying to negotiate, and half that time he spent showing people 2028 MAGA hats. So he hasn't taken it seriously, and we just heard his own press secretary say his top priority is his ballroom that he's illegally building. Meanwhile, there's footage of federal workers, American citizens, standing in food lines because he's not paying them. So it's a disaster, and I think the reason that the focus on healthcare is so important is because we see in states across the country, people's premiums are going to go way up, and Republicans have no healthcare plan. Donald Trump, for over a year, has said he's had concepts of a healthcare plan, and the guy was already president once. So nothing from the Republicans. That's really the problem.
Kaivan, you set you said that, the bill directly on the Republicans, but at the same time, I want to ask Joseph, right? Joseph Williams, there seems to be a generalized rejection from the U.S. public against especially the executive. So is Donald Trump footing this political bill?
It's hard to say. I mean, it's really right now, the American people are saying it's a pox on both their houses. Both the Republicans and the Democrats are really being pilloried in public here because people do want the government to function. They do want their paychecks. They do want their Social Security benefits. But the problem we have here is that the Republicans are in control of all three branches of government. They've got a majority on the Supreme Court, they've got the White House, they've got both houses of Congress. So it's going to be easier for the Democrats to make the case that this should be pinned on Donald Trump and the Republicans. And remember, we've kind of seen this movie before, where right before the election in 2024, Joe Biden had a plan to solve immigration, but Donald Trump said, no, don't pass it, Republicans, because if you do, I'll lose that issue to run on as politics. So I think that it's going to be a big picture, going to be easier for the Democrats to shift the blame to the Republicans, but they're not going to be blameless, mainly because they are the ones who have the power to say yes to Republicans, and Republicans are trying to put that shoe on their foot. Whether or not it fits remains to be seen.
I want to go to William Lee. William, the U.S. is losing $400 million a day in this shutdown. The global markets are looking at the U.S. And its economy. How is the U.S. faring amid this deadlock?
Well, Diego, you have to remember that the shutdown itself doesn't really change things in the economy. The economy chugs along by itself. There people are hurt, but the economy itself is not so much hurt. The people who are not getting paychecks, for sure, they're hurt. A lot of the people who are not getting paychecks, by the way, are outside the government. The consultants and the people who are on contracts to the U.S. government, they're not going to get paid, and they're not going to get retroactive pay as well. The federal workers at least can look forward to having their pay paid later once government starts again. But I think the key to this shutdown is that the reason why it's so different from all the other ones is a lot, aside from all the political rhetoric that we've just heard from all these other speakers, the rhetoric is that everyone is at blame, right? The other one's blaming the other, but the strategy here is very different. The Democrats are using this as a strategy to try to pass legislation instead of using continuing resolutions to continue government. The Republicans are using this strategically to reduce the size of government and continue the work of the Department of Government Efficiency under Elon Musk. They want to be able to fire people when the government programs are no longer funded. So here we have a very different kind of shutdown because there's a big strategic angle on both sides, and that's what's keeping the shutdown, probably prolonging it much more than it would be otherwise.
William, there's also another angle, which is food stamps in this shutdown. I want to go to the next report we have from Jim Spellman, because we've been discussing about the strategy and the politics behind this, but Americans face losing nutrition assistance in the U.S. government shutdown, and if it continues, especially into November, right? Those potentially affected include children, the elderly, and people with disabilities. And our colleague, CGTN's Jim Spellman, has a report.
SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, sometimes known as food stamps, may run out of funds by the end of the month if the U.S. government shutdown continues.
So you're talking about millions and millions of vulnerable families, of hungry families that are not going to have access to these programs because of this shutdown.
More than 40 million Americans receive SNAP benefits, including about 16 million children, 8 million older people, and people with disabilities.
Families would lose their nutritious food access. So they would lose the benefits in order to buy things like infant formula or fruits and vegetables that they get every month. And we're very concerned because the emergency food system at this point is already really tapped out, even going into the shutdown.
Local food banks can help bridge the gap, but they don't have the capacity to cover a loss of SNAP benefits.
For every meal that these wonderful food banks and food pantries give, SNAP provides 9. And I think it's also important to note that our food is more expensive than it was last year. The money is not going as far as it should. So even with food pantries, there's limit as to how much they can give.
And many SNAP recipients have few other options.
I don't know what I would eat because I rely on that to expect to eat for the month. That would hurt my pocket. I wouldn't know what to do.
Earlier in the shutdown, the Trump administration used tariff revenue to temporarily fund a separate food program for women, infants, and children. But so far, the administration has not committed to similarly funding SNAP in November. The crisis could also be averted by Congress acting to reopen the government. But in Washington, there seems to be little interest in compromise or negotiation to end the shutdown. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
Brandon, I want to come to you because a big part of the Republican vote is on food stamps.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a big demographic, and they are seeing deep uncertainties in this context. Do you think it's going to affect the electoral chances of the party?
Absolutely. Mississippi, Alabama, these are the backwoods of folks who supported this president. And now the fact that, you know, when you talk about food stamps and food and SNAP, this directly impacts those people. And so I think what you're going to see after January, you're going to start to see not only just the president, but you're going to start to see those senators who represent these southern states or even these Midwestern states. People are going to start pushing back. They're going to start feeling the pain of this. And I think this president has to address it. And, you know, the reality is, even though we know, you know, the Democrats in some cases are trying to push this policy, the president has to get front and center of this, because as I said before, if you look at the history of these shutdowns, who is in power has been the one that has been most negatively impacted.
And Kaivan, Democrats have always been the big, you know, have made out of programs like food assistance a big banner, a big party banner. Them being thrown into these uncertainties, where does that leave the party?
Well, I think it's a really interesting dynamic here where at the same time, a couple things are happening. You have this shutdown, which is impacting things like SNAP, but we also have the massive cuts in Trump's big, beautiful bill from a couple months ago, some of the impact which is starting to take effect here. And I think voters won't necessarily be the ones dissecting, was this because of the shutdown or because of that bill? But that bill, for example, cut $180 billion in funding to SNAP. And so I think those two taken together squarely put this on the Republican shoulders. And by the way, there's so many clips, because we have been here before, of Donald Trump, of Republicans saying during 2021, when there was almost a shutdown, that it rests with the president, that the party in control is to blame. And Joe Biden led through and he avoided a shutdown. So I think that it's hard to argue here that Democrats are going to lose this. And we even saw Sean Spicer earlier today say that he thinks Republicans are really botching the messaging on this. And I think that we're seeing that impact in the polling.
And at the same time, basic consumption, William, is within the realm of this program that reaches about a fourth of Americans. That's a fourth of the market here. Do you see any economic impacts, William, on any uncertainty or potential problem on SNAP?
I think the problem with the SNAP program is that it is funded in a way that is year to year and is an entitlement to those who are in need. And to correct what was said earlier, the cuts in the big beautiful bill are work requirements and getting people to get off of SNAP who don't qualify to be on SNAP. So it's really making the program more efficient than anything else, than actual cuts. But you're absolutely right that a lot of people are suffering because government programs are funded year to year. And the best way to get the funding going again is to get the government going again and to be less strategic on both sides, both the Democrats to try to get their healthcare stuff done now rather than being negotiated toward the end of the year, which was the original plan, and for the Republicans to view less of a need to reduce the size of government using this particular opportunity and to do it much more through legislation.
And Joseph, I'd like to get your take on what happens when a program with this reach, right, 72 million Americans reached, is affected. Do you think it will not only affect the party structure, but also the bigger social fabric of the country? How are you analyzing this?
Well, I think there's a couple ways to look at it. The first is the fact that, yes, there were some cuts in the big, beautiful bill, 187 million, or 187 billion rather, worth of cuts, which is going to affect people from jump. I mean, whether or not it's a work requirement or whether or not it's driving people ineligible off the rolls, a lot of people are not going to get those benefits, and some people are going to go hungry, full stop. That's going to cause a lot of problems. You already heard from those reports. It's putting a lot of pressure on food banks. These are the charitable organizations that give free food, and food is already more expensive for them to buy. So that's another ripple effect. The third effect is that the benefits weren't all that much to begin with, about $187 per month per person or per household, or per person in a household. Not a whole lot when food prices are going through the roof. Ground beef at $7 a pound. So I think it's going to damage the economy. It's going to damage Trump's standing on the economy because, remember, he ran on an economic message. I'm the guy to fix the economy. I've been here before. When I was president last, he said the economy was humming right along. We had no problems. I can do that again. This really takes away from that message. And you look at all the things that have happened with Donald Trump over the last 9 months, 10 months, give or take. Not a lot of it has had to do with the economy. The closest we've gotten is him putting pressure on the Federal Reserve, and that really didn't go as far as it needed to go, as far as he's concerned. Inflation ticked up to almost 3% last month, year over year. It's not a great picture for people. And so I think when the midterms roll around, if there are free and fair elections, as a lot of people are calling for, President Trump will suffer on his standing on the economy. We haven't even talked about farmers and how they contribute to food stamps and the food benefit programs and how their trade is being affected over China. So I think instead of like isolating these one by one, these issues one by one, I think collectively it's a really big problem, not only for the country, but also for the president. And instead of like an individual viewpoint, it always seems like everything, everywhere, all at once, that we're trying to get our arms around a lot of things that are kind of intertwined. And I think the hunger that will happen because of the government shutdown is one really big indicator that the nation is going to have to go through a little bit of suffering before all of this gets resolved.
And Joseph, you speak about the bigger picture, right? And there's something I want to set up, a discussion I want to set up with the next thought, because you bring in the bigger picture, you bring in the midterm elections, right? And a lot is going on nationally. I'd like to listen to Tanner Clay now. Set it up.
In America, it seems like the common person and the individual doesn't seem to matter as much as the people in power. And we've seen a lot of, for instance, with redistricting, we've seen a lot of people that it seems like politicians think that they get to choose their voters and voters don't get to choose their politicians.
Interesting point there. There's a lot of redistricting and there's not a one-party issue going on there. Kaivan, the Democrats are following a Republican cue to rethink and rebuild congressional districts to gain seats in Congress. Is this copycat or kind of copycat strategy a potential risk for the party?
Well, I think not responding is the bigger risk. I mean, it's essentially a self-defense position here. And I think I look at what California is doing in that frame. I'm actually an attorney as well. And self-defense in this country has 3 elements. You need an imminent threat. And we have states like Texas doing this already. Then you need to respond proportionally. And we have, Texas stole 5 seats and California is trying to take 5 back. And then you need to retreat when the threat subsides. And California's proposition expires in 2030 and goes back to those independent commissions. So I think it fits very nicely in that self-defense framework. And we're going to have Democrats across the country pushing this because Republicans like North Carolina continue to follow suit. So it's really about just trying to catch up here and have a fair election and have the people's voice represented.
And Brandon, we can say the Republicans started it, but at the same time, well, at least they had the first initiative, but at the same time, it's become a national sport.
You know, the issue that I've always found with gerrymandering is, first of all, there should never be a safe district. the power of ideas is what people should be voting on, not keeping the same politician there for 30 and 40 years. But what I've also found interesting is that gerrymandering goes both ways. It almost reminds me of term limits, where some are saying, well, yeah, I support term limits, but I want to stay in my seat. And so I always found this interesting with gerrymandering, that it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican, the language of Washington is self-preservation.
And I'd like to go to Joseph, because amid all this big discussion, right? Joseph, what kind of main indicators are you trying to follow to try and understand, do you see any potential winner here?
At this point, it's hard to see. Each side is trying to use leverage to their own advantage, but both sides are suffering in the public sphere. A lot of people are saying, this is ridiculous government, it's dysfunctional, please get your act together and give me my benefits, or if you're a troop, give me a paycheck. But I think the biggest indicators to keep an eye on here, number one, is the economy. We already talked about how prices are really starting to spiral, and food banks are starting to feel that kind of pressure. They can't buy as much as they need to satisfy the demand. I think the second thing you need to watch is polling. Trump's numbers have been really low lately. They may get lower. We don't really know what the future is going to hold, but I do know that the optics of tearing down the east wing of the White House, during the middle of a government shutdown to build this palatial ballroom, that's not a good look that the people feel like they want to relate to. You heard the man in the last interview segment saying he doesn't feel like politicians care about guys like him. That's going to resonate in those poll numbers, I believe. And the third number you need to watch out for are the prices in the grocery stores. Already we talked about inflation ticking up. Where's it going to end? Are we going to continue to have higher prices? Is the president going to step up and do anything to address that? Remember, he ran on the economy, and the economy is not doing so hot right now. Polls are indicating that people feel worse about their own economy than they do better about their own economy than they do about the country's economy. And a lot of people are starting to have buyer's remorse. So red states may have some numbers that might be a little concerning to Donald Trump. Mississippi, Alabama, as your other guest suggested, those are bastions of Trump country. If the numbers start getting soft there, then the White House should be really worried, and they should probably come to the table to try to deal with Democrats and get the government back open.
William, I'd like to get your take on what do you think is going to happen at the grocery store for Americans?
At the grocery store, we see prices actually not rising that much. The shot up in prices that we've seen are in things like consumer durables, washing machines, refrigerators, and cars, and stuff like that are being hit by some of the tariff increases. But let's remember, the inflation rate is it came out, it's 3%, and it's well below where it was under the Biden administration. The other thing is the economy is doing well. The GDP is growing at 3+, almost 4%. Unemployment rate is historically high at 4.25%, which is the natural rate of unemployment for the economy. So the economy is doing well. Retail sales, people are buying like crazy. Now, there are inequalities in this economy, and I think what you focused on the entire show so far has been the people at the very bottom end, and they need help, and they certainly do need help. But the best help they can get is through more jobs, and that's exactly what Donald Trump is trying to do through investments. He has asked the rest of the world to come invest in the United States, and we will protect you with a tariff barrier against unfair competition. But to invest here, we're giving you the incentive of lower taxes, fewer regulations, and smaller government. That's the promise that he has made the American people, and he's so far from day one has been carrying that out fairly rapidly in trying to get more investment dollars in the United States. So the economy itself is doing well. There's certain people in the economy that are not doing well, and we spent the whole show doing that, but the other part of the economy that is doing well is doing exceedingly well. And let's keep that in mind. But you need the government back in work again, because the government plays an important role in the economy, too important a role, and should be smaller. But nevertheless, to get the economy working again, both sides have to agree that their strategies of wanting to get smaller government through reductions of force and legislating medical benefits through a continuing resolution, those are bad strategies, and both sides have got to abandon them.
William, I see that element, or that element, better said, is visible, right? But at the same time, there is a greater context where this is evolving. What you explain is evolving, and it includes politics. And I wanna go very short with you, Brandon, on one point, which is, how do you think the Republicans can actually snap out of all this?
Well, you know, here's the thing. I think the president needs to have a conversation. I think he needs to be the one to bring Democrats together. And here's the reality. I mean, we're already 4 weeks in. We can't afford to go another 4 weeks. And so I think he's got to bite the bullet and say, you know what? I may not win this battle, but I'll win the war long term. The American people are suffering. And, you know, to segue on what the last guest said, which I'll conclude, you know, this is the problem when you have government too big. And now the president's promise was reducing the size of government. Well, guess what, folks? That's what this is. But I also think optics and perception means everything. And right now, it doesn't matter on what side of the table you're on. People are hurting. Food is expensive. The government has to do something.
Kaivan, I've got 30 seconds, and I want to see how do you think Democrats can move forward after this?
Yeah, I think they're going to continue to focus on the economy. You know, I'm not an economist, but I have my MBA, and I don't think what was said about the economy so far here was true. The indicators are the economy is doing terribly. Prices are high. Beef is at the highest ever. Electricity prices, highest ever. So people are feeling that pain, and I think Democrats are going to continue to message on, we ran on affordability. We're running on affordability in New York City, which everyone's talking about, and I think that.
You know, Kaivan, we'll have to leave it there. We run out of time. Certainly a very, very rich discussion, but I have to say that here it ends. We have to leave it here. I'm Diego Laje in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching another edition of The Heat.